Okay, so here we are. It's the last one on parts of speech. It's prepositions and conjunctions, and of course, other interesting things, because I always like to look at the interesting things, not just, dry grammar, because that's what we all faced in our schooling years. And it's important that we add a little bit of, some flavoring, something extra, and make it a bit more fun. So I'll start with that first, because here I've got some thoughts on grammar. And the reason I'm starting with this first, as opposed to doing prepositions and conjunctions, is that it sets the scene for preposition in particular. And we'll see why that is. So there are approaches to grammar. One is called functional, and then there's another approach called traditional. And then there's a descriptive type of grammar and a prescriptive type of grammar. And then we'll have a look at grammar as a social tool or a social determiner, I guess. We'll have a look. But I want to start with this functional and traditional grammar, because I have mentioned it before. And I think it's really important to look at it, because we want to move away from this sort of, this is grammar, this is a noun, this is a verb. There are different nuances to studying grammar. So the first is functional grammar. And functional is not as rigid as the other type, which is traditional, because it sees grammatical categories in terms of the how they function and the meaning. And it kind of goes from, it doesn't recognize a sentence as a grammatical structure, because the most it recognizes is the clause, and clauses put together form sentences. So it doesn't actually go beyond a clause. It just stops at a clause. And it treats everything, bunches of words and groups of words, as carrying meaning on their own. So the hierarchy for functional grammar is morpheme first, word next, then groups of words, and then a clause. And functional grammar can be studied within cultural and social context. And it's a means of making meaning and communicating meaning, or language is. And it's got a sociological nature at its basis. It's suited, I guess, for learners of English who haven't got that cultural and social context. They kind of need to know expressions. They have to find and use expressions as a group of words rather than individual words they have to put together. So that is that functional grammar aspect. In contrast, traditional grammar, it recognizes sentences as the highest hierarchy, and it does not recognize groups of words. So we'll hear things like an adjective group or a noun group. Traditional grammar does not recognize groups of words. It recognizes morphemes, then put together make up words, and then words that are put together form clauses. And then there's another one in there that's a phrase. And then there's a sentence, and the sentence is the ultimate in traditional grammar. And it even breaks up sentences into three categories: a simple, a compound, and a complex sentence. And we've heard that many times before. So those are what the distinctions between traditional and functional grammar. Personally, I don't subscribe. I subscribe more to the traditional approach, more so than the functional approach, though there are aspects of functional approaches that are really useful when you start looking at how authors create meaning and how you want to say something to create a certain feeling or a certain mood. And we'll see that in a minute. In functional grammar, functional grammar places English words in four categories. So this is where we don't have the distinct categories. They're nouns, verbs, adjectives, and prepositional groups, and nothing else. So all the other words, sort of all of them can fall into those categories, or are just connectives or determiners or something else that they use. But in traditional grammar, I usually use the 9 parts of speech, but it has 10, and it adds number as a part of speech. Like if we say, I don't know, 2008, in the year of 2008. And all the other ones that we've been looking at. We won't look at interjection just because there's not enough time, and I don't want to stretch this any longer than 7 sort of sessions. And then each of them, and we've done this before, is further divided into subcategories. So we have done that with nouns, with verbs, with adjectives. So we've categorized them in different other subcategories as well. So as you can see, I'm a subscriber to more traditional grammar, and my approach to these sessions, at least. Functional grammar gives a clause different functional labels depending on the 3 kinds of meta functions. So those are the function that it plays in context, not necessarily in the sentence, but in the context. So those functions are the goal. So usually we see that as being who is it that's doing an action, the process, which is the action, and the circumstance, which is everything else. It's your objects and your indirect objects and your descriptors and your connectives, everything else. So it doesn't break it down as thoroughly as traditional grammar does, and it's highly subject to interpretation and personal interpretation. In contrast, traditional grammar analyzes a sentence structure into what we know as subject, predicate, object, attributive, adverbial, and complement. And if you would like to sign up now, I'm going to do my plug, to the free simple sentence structure, actually, if you have already signed up, you'll receive notification when that's going to go on. Because the next thing that I'm going to do is sentence structure, where we're going to really look in depth at subjects and predicates and all of those in that list. So which approach do you take? The functional grammar approach or the traditional grammar approach? Well, I've already indicated that you sort of need a bit of both. Traditional grammar gives us a little bit more understanding of how things fit together. Functional grammar is more about the meaning that we're trying to convey. So there's a place for both. For learners of English, functional grammar works better. That's what research indicates. But traditional grammar works better for people who are native or advanced speakers of English, because they've got the grammar, they understand the idioms, the structure intuitively. So we need to refine that understanding and figure out how things fit together. Whereas a learner of English, they need to have things given to them, like the phrase, this is how you say this, this is how you express this. So that functional grammar comes into play for a learner of English. I believe similarly for young people, young children who probably haven't had language exposure. And actually we probably see that a lot, or with very young children, when we correct something, this is how you say this, we use functional grammar in those oral interactions with younger children. So then we look at the descriptive prescriptive aspect. Functional grammar is the descriptive kind of grammar, and then traditional is prescriptive. And it is this sort of aspect of traditional grammar that's that's made it so dry and hard to swallow, because it says it prescribes how things are going to be said and the rules and how it's going to be used, and there's only one right way, and it can create resentment, I guess, and opposition. When, as human beings, when somebody prescribes something or says you have to do this way, humans don't like that very much. We like to have a little bit of leeway to understand how we can put things together ourselves. So again, the descriptive part, it's about creating and analyzing meaning. The meaning is at the core of this kind of grammar. And it has 4 sort of ways of functioning. One is functions and systems. So it's like a menu you choose from. So if you want to express something in a context, you will choose from a menu of different ways of saying something. And then it has hierarchical units. So it looks at morphology a little bit more, and phrases and groups of words that are placed in hierarchy. And then the theme is the context of in which the meaning is being formed, and the mood that you want to convey. So those are the descriptive aspects that sort of fit with functional grammar, but it fits with descriptive grammar as well. And then oh, sorry, I see that I have not changed this prescriptive. Sorry about that. Prescriptive grammar is about grammatical correctness of expression. It's where you get into editing. Sorry, please ignore the bottom bit here. It's about, it's right or wrong. It's about that red pen on your paper when we were younger. It's about you say it like this, not like that. And it's very rule driven. So, the next thing that I want to talk about is grammar as a social tool. So to look at the social or the historical aspect of grammar, we need to kind of travel back to about the 17th century. So the first, just to set up a little point in time, the first dictionary that contained something like 3,000 words was printed in 1604. And it was printed because Cawdrey, I think was his name, he wanted to preserve, but also give people who didn't know some words additional words to use and context in which to use them. And the 17th century was a really significant time in European history because it's the age of the Renaissance, it's the end of the Dark Ages, and the rebirth. And this is where art and education and travel and exchange of ideas really took off. And we saw the rise of the middle class. So what's happening here, we had the upper classes. So it's the end of feudalism, and then the rise of sort of a class-based system. So now we've got an upper class, and then we've got a middle class that's rising. So those are your merchants, your lawyers, your accountants, the people with ideas who are commercializing their ideas. So they're kind of rising up. And with that rise in social status, they can afford education. And all of a sudden, you had your upper class people, families, who were sending their children to study at Oxford and Cambridge and the likes. But all of a sudden, you've got this middle class that's rising, and they can afford to do the same. So grammar has been used as a tool of oppression, I would say, because the way you spoke told others where you're from and your background. So there was this drive to preserve upper class grammar in English so that the upper class would remain distinguished in the way that they used speech and their diction. And this is where we saw the rise of words like grass and glass. That long R, it's a posh way of saying grass, and it's meant to be said grass and glass, but because this distinction they wanted distinction to be created and came up with different ways to distinguish themselves to maintain their status, their upper class status. So for a long time, the grammar was, and probably well into the 20th century, was a tool of separating the social classes or telling who's from where. And also dialects as well, so the way we use grammar. More so now, we can tell based on dialect where people might be coming from. In the 18th century, we started seeing a rise in the study of roots of English. And here we had some purists coming through, and they recognized that English was based on German or Germanic language, but also had significant roots in Latin. So they looked at grammar of Latin, and they said, well, English has its roots in Latin, therefore, it should have the same grammar rules. So they came up with these grammar rules that fit Latin, but it doesn't necessarily fit English. And it became the standard grammar rules. A lot of them became the grammar rules. One of those, or actually two of them, one is called the split into infinitive. So the most famous split into infinitive that we know of is to boldly go. So having an adverb in between the to and go, it splits that to go. And that's a no-no according to those rules. And then the other one is never finish a sentence with a preposition. And I think we've heard that one many times. And they have their origins in the 18th century. And particularly, it was Lindley Murray who published the first sort of English grammar reference book. And that was used for over 100 years as a reference, because it wasn't until Fowler's Dictionary of Modern English Usage that we started sort of getting a new blood or new ideas into grammar, although a lot of it stay the same. And then in the 20th century, it's the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, we've started to see the rise of English grammars. And this is as a result of colonization and travel, as much as differentiation among people within a country. So what I mean by that is that every geographical area where English was spoken adapted English to suit their needs. And this is the great thing about English, is that it's so flexible and adaptable that it can take on whatever people feel necessary. And that's why it's been so successful. And it's now spoken by more people than any other language has ever been spoken. So English grammar. So now we've got English grammars that are geographically placed, but we've also got English grammars that are socially placed, but also ethnically within a region. So what I mean by that is that if we think about someone from the Pacific Islands, they will speak English in a certain way, and you can pick it up. Definitely, you can hear. We call it dialect, but within the sentence, how they put sentences together might differ, maybe something very specific. So this is a way of maybe deriving identity. So using grammar in a certain way within a group helps you belong to that group, and it helps that social cohesion. But also, if you come from that group, it is part of your identity. So what I'm talking, what we'll see, I guess, in a little bit, what I mean by that as well. Things like "cause," because I want to. So shortening those, they started out in a specific group, and now they're used more commonly. But if we think about the, I want to say the sort of hip hop type, that they have their own grammar as well. It's part of their social cohesion and identity. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say by that. At the end, what I want to really focus on here is that we each come with our own grammar from our background. And I don't believe in erasing that from children and saying, that's incorrect. It's actually about acknowledging where they come from and how they use language within those groups, because we cannot erase it. What we can do is open their minds up and say, well, in this context, this is how we use English. In your context, this is how you use it. And it's not putting it down. We should not use it as a social classification tool, but an identity tool. And as we don't want to erase somebody's identity, parts of somebody's identity, we don't want to use grammar in the same way. We want to acknowledge them because it's valid. It's valid to them. And the thing is that if they speak that in that certain way, we still understand them. So the meaning isn't lost. It's just the way that we hear it, and whether or not we're used to that way or we belong to that social group. I don't know if I don't think I've got special examples right now. And there's some examples that I think that are the ones that I know I don't want to use because they might be misinterpreted as putting a culture down or a community down. So I'd rather not because I'm not well prepared. So thank you for the question. All right. So which approaches, again, which approach do you use? Functional, traditional, descriptive, prescriptive, grammar as a social tool? Well, I believe it's all of them, and it depends on the context in which we're going to use them. That's because some functional will fit in some contexts, traditional will fit in others. I think as educators, we have to know about them all and understand their place in the world so that we can make the best choices for the children in front of us. So that's my, but you can make up your own mind about which one you'd like to go and explore and maybe make your own. But I believe there's a place for all of these approaches. So now that we've completed that little preamble, I want to move ahead and look at just everything that we've looked at so far. So we've looked at nouns, we've looked at adjectives and articles, pronouns, and verbs that drive this whole thing. And I'm going to now continue with the preposition. And just to link the previous section to prepositions, I stated that grammar experts in the past have said that we should never end a sentence with a preposition. And we will see that that is not the case and that it doesn't really matter. So what are prepositions? They show relationships in time and space. They show logical relationships between things, places, and people. And they're most commonly followed by a noun. I would say 99% of the time they will be followed by a noun. Occasionally they'll be followed by nothing and a couple of other things. The etymology of this word is as follows: pre, meaning before, and position, which is to put, to set, or to place something. So together they mean to place before, which in this context, in our sentence structure context, it's placed before a noun or a pronoun or a noun phrase, but we'll see that in a second. I refer to it as the marketing department for the noun because it points to the noun or noun phrase or replacement. It's the most idiomatic part of speech. And what I mean by that is that it's used in different ways, and the ways are not consistent, but they reflect culture, they reflect the way of speech. And they have, in each of those contexts, they have a set usage, might be colloquial or dialectical. It could be in fixed expressions that even though grammatically they make no sense, or if you start to analyze the expression itself doesn't fit correct grammatical structure, nonetheless, we use that. And I don't think I have an example here right off. Right, there's some functions here. So the function is almost always is followed by a noun, noun phrase, or pronoun. I've got a couple of examples. One is I fell asleep during the movie. So here is our preposition, and here's our noun, the movie. We know it's a noun because it's introduced by its article. There's I relax by singing in the shower. So singing in the shower is a noun phrase. That whole thing is a noun phrase. And in the last example is she gave the book to me being a pronoun. So those are examples of prepositions that introduce a noun, noun phrase, and a pronoun. Some forms of a preposition, they come in as single words, and there are over 100 of these. And pairs of words or groups. So they, it depends how, but sometimes you want to look at it as a whole. Sometimes you can break it down and say, oh, there's a noun in there, and there are a couple of, so on account of, for example, on, would be a preposition, account is a noun, and of would be a preposition. So within it, there are other parts of speech, but we can treat it as one together. Types of prepositions. So this is about their function. They can point to a direction. So they show direction. I walked to the dairy. And those are just, they're not as many of direction, but those are sort of the main ones, the most common ones that we would encounter. Park the car, park in the garage, and the ball rolled onto the road. We've got prepositions of time. We will finish in an hour. So an hour, that there's an hour here would be the noun. The movie starts at 6 p.m. So this here could be considered a noun phrase. And this goes back to our traditional grammar description where there's that 10th part of speech called number. So that can fit into that. And we arrive on Sunday. And these in, at, and on, if you can imagine that some of them will have a wider focus. So it will encompass more time. And if we, so in, for example, we could say in 2008, and that covers the whole year. But if I say at 6 p.m., it's quite precise. And on, or on is more precise than in a week or in a year. Or if I say on Sunday, that's a day. But if I say at 6 p.m., it's quite precise. So there is a level of precision in the prepositions themselves. Along with time, we have duration that are sort of a little bit different. I lived in Auckland since 2008. He works during the summer. And I will finish my degree within 2 years. So all of these, some of them work in pairs. If you look at this one, from to, I work from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So to, from and to, they together, they work together. So they're considered a pair. Prepositions of place and location. These are the most common ones. I think these are the ones that we focus most at school, where, you know, you take an object and you place the object in different parts relative to another object. And you start to call it on, under, above, behind. So all of those are the most common, the ones that we associate with prepositions. And there's an explanation, there's a reason why, because we think about the word position and it's a relative place, it's a location of something. So here we've got, I've got this, I lived in Auckland since 2008. That's from the previous slide. The cat is next to the box. Next to, they're a pair. The garage is under the house. So this is the relative position of two items. There are other spatial relationships. And those could be pairs or single words that don't necessarily talk about above or below, but just a little bit more nuanced, I guess. And here you'll find a couple of things, and I've put them here on purpose. The first example is he took his shirt off, and this is a perfect example of that, what not to do, and a sentence and a preposition. And I will advocate now, will say that that's not always the case. And that we shouldn't really focus and use that as a black and white rule, because if you were to change it, sometimes a sentence can become too complicated to understand and to say, and the meaning is lost. Now, the second one that I've got, the dog is running towards the little girl. I think if you think back to adverbs, we looked at words as and word words as indicators that they're adverbs. In this case, something can function as an adverb, can also function as a preposition. So we see this because it's followed directly by a noun. So it points to the girl. And this one is she placed ahead of her competitor. So there's another noun phrase there. And this is a pair of pair working as a preposition. There are some logical pairings and some pairings that take place with verbs. And they're just certain ways. And this is what we call almost they're idiomatic expressions because they convey a different meaning than the verb itself. So if I say I worry, if I say worrying about, then it gives you a little bit more of an indication what I might be worrying about. If I just say I worry, it's I worry in general, I'm a worrier. But the moment I say worry about, so these prepositions go in particular with these kinds of verbs, and these are not exclusive by any means. We say arrive at, and we smile at someone, or look at something, but we can also look for something. So here you can see the nuanced meaning when we look at something versus when we look for something, or when we look in or into something. We're still looking, but the preposition just adds that layered meaning that we can't otherwise get. We don't have a verb to indicate looking into or looking for something. Well, we can, maybe looking for could be searching. And other pairings, from can be paired with differ and suffer. And I was looking at this example. If I say the sentence, she suffers from dementia, it makes sense. So that's suffering from something. But if I say she was diagnosed with dementia, so now even if we switch it around, switch the meaning, then we need a different preposition. So those are just logical prepositions that go with specific verbs. Something belongs to something, we contribute to or towards something. We refer to something. We don't refer on or for or in. Sometimes they're paired with adjectives, so they're preceded by an adjective. So those are, again, logical pairings, and they're just the way things are said. So this is where that functional grammar comes into play a little bit, because this is a phrase that works like this. It's paired like this because that's how we know, and because that's how it's logical to an English speaker. So this aspect of preposition actually comes a little bit into that functional grammar realm. We are familiar with something, generally speaking, or something is familiar to us. So when we switch it around, it's a different, it's not familiar with, well, it could be familiar with us, but if we're familiar with something, they might be familiar to us. There's some problems that I've highlighted before, and this is one of them. And I think some of the first grammar experts really were adamant about this, because in Latin, you cannot end a sentence in a preposition. So we have a little look at a few things. Looking back at the example with he took his shirt off, we can see that off ends the sentence. If we were to follow the rule of not ending in a preposition, we can say he took off his shirt. The meaning is the same, so there's not much going on there. We can certainly do that. In speech, you'll encounter he took his shirt off more often than he took off his shirt. When we're writing, that's when we might say he took off his shirt. Just because authors and editors have been trained not to end in a preposition, so they try not to, and they switch around some things. However, we come to a sentence like this: the car has not yet been paid for. Has not been paid for. Excuse my grammar, my misspelling there. The car has not been paid for. Perfectly sound sentence. We understand exactly what it means. But then if we were to move that preposition from the end of the sentence, we have to change it around a bit. It has not been paid for the car. It has not been paid for the car. So you see that doesn't flow, whether it's written or spoken. That sentence is very convoluted. It doesn't have the same meaning than as the one before, when we can totally get that the car hasn't yet been paid for. The second one, it has not been paid for, the car. So following the rule of the preposition being followed by the noun here. So I would say the rule of not having a preposition at the end is a bit arbitrary in some cases, at least. And if you try to change it, it would change the entire meaning of the sentence. I would say in academic writing, so if you're writing a research paper, that's definitely a rule to follow. But in regular speech and regular writing, I wouldn't make such a big fuss. There are a couple more. So I know the house he lives in. I know the house in which he lives. Now you can see that this is more in terms of register. The first one is more casual. I know the house he lives in. And the second sentence, I know the house in which he lives, sounds a bit more elevated, a little bit more posh. But we also have more words. We've got this here. And when we start adding relative pronouns, which is it becomes a bit harder to understand, especially if you have longer sentences, because our working memory can only hold on to a limited amount of information. And if our sentences are long and they have a lot of relative pronouns and things that are in place of other things and referring to other things, we kind of lose track of what it's referring to in a long sentence. So we prefer shorter sentences if we use expressions like this, like the second sentence. But in saying that, there's nothing wrong with the first sentence either. I would give the children the choice because it depends on the tone that they want to convey. If they want to come across as more in a more elevated way, certainly use the second option. There's also another aspect here when it comes to narrative writing, is when you're creating a character and we tell the children, think about a saying that this person says all the time. So it becomes their saying. We might help them determine what kind of dialogue, what kind of speech pattern one of the character has. So if they're saying, oh, so-and-so is posh, then they might be talking like this, like they do in the second sentence. So that can help create characterization, more in-depth characterization. I think here we're talking about intermediate age students who are quite capable writers. The second example I have, I like the people I work with, and the variation of that is I like the people with whom I work. So again, that's a little posh, it's a little bit more elevated, and we kind of have to know what relative pronoun to use here, because it's not the people who I work, the people with who I work, it's the people with whom I work. All right, some other problems, run-on sentences. I'm here to add to I guess, explain that sometimes wordiness in a sentence is because we use too many prepositions and there's too much explanation going on in one sentence. This is one sentence and it goes like this. The author chose to end his sentence with a preposition for the purpose of proving that the position of the preposition at the end of the sentence is perfectly acceptable in writing as a means of adding clarity. Perfectly sound sentence, I think, are way too long, way too long. And we can look at something like this and go, okay, well, what do we need? How can we break this up? We really need everything in there. But prepositions can cause run-on sentences, just like conjunctions, which will follow after this. I haven't got an example for them, but conjunctions and prepositions are notoriously guilty of creating run-on sentences. So in a sentence like this, I would get students to highlight the preposition, depending on what it is. If it's a conjunction issue or a preposition issue, just highlight the prepositions and go, right, let's have a look. Well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've got 10 prepositions. Way too many. And going back to that working memory, we cannot hold on to all this information. By the time we reach the end, we've forgotten what the beginning was about. So different ways of editing this particular one. You can have a go yourselves if you want. Other problems are redundancies, and those are quite common. And this has to, oh, here's an answer to Claudia's question about giving an example. There's some groups of population that will say, where is he at? And that's a redundancy because where has to do with location. So being at somewhere is already accounted for, the place, with when we use where. So using at again is just redundant. It's the same thing. So it's repeating. We can just say, where is he? So that's one example of those usages, sort of a little that are a bit off. And another example that I hear often, he jumped off of the pier. I mean, look, any child could walk in your classroom and say, he jumped off of the pier. Makes sense to them. It doesn't take away from the meaning, but it's redundant because if you jump off something, that of is not necessary there. So those are some redundancies to just look out for. And with that, we move on to conjunctions. All right, so I'll just carry on and leave some room for questions at the end. Conjunctions, what are they? They are connectors. The word conjunction has 3 parts to it: con, junct, and ion. Con means together. Junct comes from the word that means to unite or to join, and it comes from the Latin word for yoke. I remember that I spoke to you in a previous session about where that comes from. So basically conjunction and the ion bit is the morpheme that turns a verb or something else into a noun. So here we have to unite together, to put together, to bring together, to join. So that's their job. That's what they do. And there are 3 types. The first one is a coordinating conjunction. And the morphology of that is co means together. Ordin is to order. And then the verb morpheme ate and the participle morpheme ing. So what it means is to order together, to put in order. And it's about joining things that are at the same level, so of equal importance and hierarchy. And these guys give us the compound sentences. Because compound sentences are 2 sentences that are of equal value, same hierarchy, and they're just joined together. And one way to remember the coordinating conjunctions, there's 7 of them, is this word here, FANBOYS. Can you see the word FANBOYS? FANBOYS. And they're as follows: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Sometimes, however, can be used as coordinating conjunction. And for is a very old-fashioned way. And it kind of has been replaced by the word because, in which case it's no longer coordinating, it would be subordinating. But nonetheless, it's a good acronym to remember, FANBOYS, because they are coordinating and they form, if we find them in a sentence, they give us compound sentences. Some examples, you recognize some of those. The teachers were frustrated, for the school had cut the funding. So in this case, there are two different sentences, and you'll see that I've sort of colored them differently. So here we have a sentence. The teachers were frustrated. That's a sentence. And then the second sentence is the school had cut the funding. And we can transpose these two. The school had cut the funding, so the teachers were frustrated. So we can change the position and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence itself. That's how we know they're of equal value, and because they can be switched around. So we've got two sentences here. They're both independent clauses, if we get into that. So there's one there, and then it's followed by a comma. And then there's a second one. The school had cut the funding, and that's your second independent clause. And they're joined together by the word for. And we'll chat a little bit about usage of comma, and where to use the commas, because it's related to conjunctions, so that they kind of work together. The second example, to finish college, I had to complete a case study and a final exam. In this case, this is a complex sentence, but that's not what we're going to talk about just yet. So we've got this bit here. To finish my degree, I had to complete a case study and a final exam. In this case, and joins two noun phrases, a case study and a final exam. In this case, we don't need to use a comma because it's not clauses that we're separating. It's just two things. If I had a third thing, if I had to say a case study, a final exam, and a presentation, in that case, I would have to use a comma because it's a comma in the list. So I would have a presentation, comma, a case study, comma, and a final exam. And there is that, do we use a comma before and? And there's no wrong way. The comma before the and it's called an Oxford comma. And if you go to Oxford University, you must use it because it's part of their requirements when you write a paper. And for some universities and some places will require that will be in their instructions. So you'll have to use, because it's part of their standard form. Some people use it, some people don't. It's not wrong if you don't. And it's just a personal choice. If you are an author, your editor might add them in because that's how they've been trained, or it might be a mutual decision. And a couple of more examples. Here's again, we've got independent clauses. The student did not complete the homework, nor did they pass the test. So nor here connects the students did not complete their homework and they did not pass the test. So two clauses. The next example, my car is old but reliable. But here connects two adjectives, old and reliable. So you can see that a conjunction can join different things. It doesn't have to be just nouns or just adjectives. It can connect clauses and phrases, all other types, but they have to be of equal value. Coordinating conjunctions, that is. We can't mix them up. We can't say noun and verb. They have to be the same within the same category. And the final example on this page, would you like to dine inside or outside? In this case, or connects to adverbs, inside or outside. I've tried to do different, to come up with different examples so that all the parts of speech are taken into account and addressed. They make, some of them make more sense when connecting clauses rather than just parts of speech. So here's two more examples of that. He complained of a headache, yet refused to take anything. So yet he refused to take anything, even though he complained of a headache. So there's that. Yet I have only been a teacher for a year, so I still have a lot to learn. I still have a lot to learn is one sentence. I have only been a teacher for a year is another sentence joined together by so, and you can see here there's a comma just before it. So a comma should go before a conjunction. That's a general rule that kind of works in most cases. Comma before a conjunction. Ah, there we go. Commas and conjunctions. Here I've got commas in a list. I like apples, oranges, and bananas. All of them are nouns and they're separated by commas. And here I'm choosing to use an Oxford comma before the end. Nouns here, next is going to be clauses. I like bananas, but I don't like banana cake. So we can take, I don't like banana cake, but I like bananas. So we can swap them around. This way we know they're both independent and they're joined by but and a comma just before. In the final one here, we've got verbs. Children like to walk, run, and skip. So commas again, those are commas in a list. The second type of conjunctions are paired conjunctions. So I like both bananas and apples. So both and work together as one. Not only do I like bananas, but I also like apples. The next one is either or. I like either bananas or apples. And the final one, I like neither bananas nor apples. So they work in pairs. I don't think there are any more. I think maybe there's maybe one or two more, but they're very limited in number, these guys. But it's good to recognize that some of them work in pairs. And this is the final kind, and it's a subordinating conjunction. And it's a biggie. Subordinating, the etymology is as follows. Sub means under. Ordin is to order. Ate is the verb, the morpheme verb, the morpheme that will create a verb. Ing is the participle form. So together, it means to order hierarchically, which is to put things in order by importance. It joins clauses based on degrees of dependence. So in a complex sentence, you'll find subordinating conjunctions in complex sentences. You will have a dependent clause and several independent clauses. And even within the dependent clauses, you will have ones that are subordinate to those. So there might be different, 4 or 5 different levels or degrees of dependence in such sentences. So we need the subordinating conjunctions to tell us what that hierarchy is. And here are some examples. After, although, while, unless. And in the previous examples with coordinating conjunction, we could see that we can take one sentence and well, they take them and swap the order, and the meaning wouldn't be lost, would be the same. But if we, for example, use after, we can use after I come home from work, I like to relax. We can't really change the order of those sentences. We can't say after I relax, I come from work, because it changes the meaning. So they can't really swap. They can be swapped as a whole, but not the way we've done it before. Some example, I will go to the game whether it rains or not. And here's the example that I was trying to give. We can take the whole thing and swap them around. Whether it rains or not, I will go to the game. It doesn't change the meaning. It just changes the position and the order, but we know whether it rains or not is your subordinating. So I will go to the game, independent clause. There's some, I think that's it. Some old-fashioned conjunctions, they're kind of fun. We mentioned that for in FANBOYS, the coordinated conjunctions is now replaced by because is considered old-fashioned. Thereof, those ST ones, whilst, amongst, amidst, are all old-fashioned, and you can tell by reading them. For, in as so much, in as much, whence it came, in as far, wherein, notwithstanding. Here's the spelling of that notwithstanding right there. So those are considered old-fashioned. There's another one, lest, in lest we forget. That's another quite old-fashioned conjunction there. So I find these kind of fun, but you do find people who use them. I hear there's somebody I know who uses whilst quite a lot. And it always stands out to me because she's the only one who does it. And I don't often hear people using whilst. Thereof, you have this more often, but in sort of legal documents. Yeah, so some of them are being used, but in more formal writing. There's some slang ones. So this is those things that are still conjunctions, and it goes back to that sort of grammar as a social tool, that they're just as relevant and they're just as effective as any other ones, as the proper ones. I don't know the proper ones as the normal ones, but they belong to the child and their community and their way of speaking. So to deny it just is almost to deny their identity, but to take it on board and say, okay, well, we don't use that in writing, or in this writing we can use it. However, they can use it in writing, because if in their story there's a character who comes from their community, they will speak like this. So, you know, in their dialogue, they could include the slang. I want to just go to this one. Versus is a conjunction, but I've heard it used as a verb, as in I versed someone. So and this is the beauty of language. It just changes all the time, and it adapts to new situations. And as we evolve as a culture and a society, and we do new things or things differently, our language is going to evolve alongside, you know, all the other things. So that's why I'm more of a take it on board as opposed to deny it and correct it as wrong grammar. It's not wrong grammar, it's their grammar, and it's part of their identity and their social and cultural context. So, and finally, I think we reached the end now. Finally, just looking forward to next week, when everything that we've done so far, everything will be put to you. So we'll look at some sentences and we'll try to reason, you know, what's what part of speech, how does it fit, why it is the part of speech that it is, and then we'll do some sentence diagramming. So I really look forward to this, because this is really the culmination of all of this, and there's a practical application to everything that we've learned, even though I do hope that I've given you enough some practical ideas as well, how to use grammar. So this is it from me. I have finished, and I really look forward to next week, and whatever it is to come in the future as well. I think starting in January, we'll look at the other ones, at the topics that we'll cover. And I think this is what I've got. I've got a couple of sort of grammar-based ones. So I've got these sentence structure and analysis. So that's just simple sentences. It's not going to go into complex sentences at all, because that probably requires about, I don't know, another 4 sessions as well. So that if we put them all together, it's going to be too confusing. There's another one that I've been asked to do, which is how I teach structured literacy online in particular, what my setup is and how I structure it. There's probably going to be a repetition of what we've just done, probably a little bit more thought out because I had never done it before. So I pulled resources from everywhere with this one. So I'm hoping to refine it and redo it at some point. So those are all the grammar and literacy based ones. I've got some math ones coming up. So I've done this one just last week, the teaching fractions. And I've had feedback on that. People want the next level. So there will be another one on foundations and then an advanced of what to do after we've done the foundation bit, and then an introduction to decimals as well, because they're all sort of related. So that's what's coming up. With that, I thank you for being with me and coming in here every week. So yeah, thank you very much.